Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm currently in a state of shock because yesterday I got the chance to see the brand new Spider Man film, Spider Man No Way Home, which you may or may not have heard of. It's only been hyped up to a ridiculous degree over the last 2 months. But anyway, I got a chance to see it, and I knew I was going to make a video on this film in some shape or form before I'd even seen it because the hype around it was so ridiculous. And it's Spider Man, and I love the character of Spider Man ever since I watched the 90s animated series when I was a kid. I've I fell in love with the character back then, and ever since then, I've been a fan of it. No matter how good or bad the interpretations of Spider Man have been over the years, I've always been on board with whatever they throw at the character. Um, and yeah, I knew I wanted to do a video on this film to some extent because it's kind of a tradition at this point that I talk about anything Spider Man related. Now, what most people are doing with this film is doing a non spoiler video and a spoiler video. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to record both videos, so I thought, screw it, I'm doing both at once. The first half of this video is going to be the non spoiler review. So if you have not seen Spider Man No Way Home, you'll be fine with watching the first half of this video. However, after a specific point, I will make it very clear when I will start talking about spoilers, and from that point on, if you've seen the film, feel free to stay, but if you have not seen No Way Home, I would recommend not watching the second half of my video until you've seen the film. So, let's start off as vaguely as possible talking about non spoiler things. And when I say non spoiler, I mean if it's shown in the trailer, then I'm going to talk about it. Um, Apart from that, though, anything else that is not shown in the trailer, I will keep stum until the end of the video. But yeah, in as vague a manner as possible, I really, really liked this film. It's a bit messy in places, um, specifically the editing and pacing in a couple of places, but I can overlook them. And again, I will go more into detail as to why in the spoiler half of this video. Um, but while I was watching this film, and the more I think about it since after watching it, is that yeah, there are a few inconsistencies and issues with this film, but the manner in which the film is handled and what they are trying to do with everything else in the film makes me overlook said issues, and I can appreciate the film for what it is trying to do rather than how it is executed, if that makes sense. As a whole, though, this film is really well done. Despite those iffy aspects, the majority of the film is really well done and has some incredibly satisfying moments for Spider Man fans, old and new. It absolutely nails the third act. Um, if I was to look at the film as a whole, I would say the first act is rather strong. The second act is pretty good, but has some inconsistencies and is where some of the iffy parts start to come in. But the third act is genuinely brilliant, in my opinion. It absolutely nails everything about the third act, and the way it ends is also incredibly satisfying. There are also a lot of moments throughout this film that felt either very cathartic or very heartbreaking. Again, I won't go into too much detail here, but that's all I'm going to say. They were either very cathartic for a specific reason, or they were very heartbreaking with how they handled it. And I will admit, this is the first Spider Man movie in quite some time that's actually made me feel something on a very deep emotional level. Um, for a variety of different reasons. But if you have not seen No Way Home yet, I highly recommend you bring tissues with you because you will cry. I cried about, I don't know, 3 or 4 times throughout this film. And I was genuinely not expecting it. This film actually hit me on quite a deep emotional level that I was genuinely not expecting from a film like this. Also, one aspect of this film that I really, really loved is that it's the first Tom Holland Spider Man film that doesn't feel like a product of the MCU. Now, don't get me wrong, I really like Homecoming and Far From Home. I think they're both really good films, but one of the main issues of them is that they do feel more like products of the MCU than traditional standalone Spider Man films. No Way Home, on the other hand, feels like they've done a complete role reversal. And though it still has a few MCU isms throughout it, for the most part, this feels more like a Spider Man film. From start to finish, this feels purely like a Spider Man film about Spider Man and Peter Parker. And I think a lot of that is down to Tom Holland's performance in this film. Because again, I've really liked him in the previous Marvel films, not just the two Spider Man films, but in Civil War and in Infinity War and in Endgame. I've really liked him as the character, but I feel like he has been kind of stuck in a rut of playing this child version of the character. Here, though, there is a lot of emotional weight and responsibility that Peter Parker and Spider Man has to deal with. And Tom Holland absolutely knocks it out the park. I think he is the best he has ever been as this character in this film. He really, really delivers a lot of the emotional beats, which again made me feel the emotional impact of this film a lot more than I was expecting to feel going into it. Um, and yeah, he is absolutely phenomenal in this film. So is all the supporting cast, to be honest. Zendaya is really, really good as MJ. That's one of my favorite things about Far From Home, is that it really strengthened and grew that relationship between MJ and Peter, and in my opinion, was the most believable relationship that I'd seen out of all the previous Spider-Man films. Here, in No Way Home, they take what that element that worked in Far From Home and just kind of keep going with it and strengthen it even more. Um, and I love the fact that they didn't completely throw that in the bin. I love the fact that they just kept going with that and made it even stronger. One thing I do want to mention just before I get into the spoiler section of the video is just a brief thing about the marketing, because a lot of people are split on how the film was handled with its marketing. Personally, I think it was kind of crap with how they handled it, but not for the reason you're probably thinking. Personally, I think they shouldn't have shown half the stuff that they showed in the trailers and in the posters, etc. There are some people out there that think they should have shown a lot more. Personally, I think they should have shown as little as possible. I saw in an interview the other day that Tom Holland said that the original plan for the marketing was to just show the stuff between Doctor Strange and Peter Parker, and that was it. All the stuff like the villains and everything else was going to be left until the actual release of the film. That sounds like a great idea. The element of surprise would have been so much more rewarding for the final film. And that's not to say that there weren't any surprising moments in the film, because there were, and they were very well done. But because of all the leaks and rumours and the way they've had to approach this marketing because of that, just makes it feel a tiny bit half-assed with how they approached the trailers for this film. And personally, I would have liked to have seen a little less in the marketing, so I could have had more surprises in the film. Rant aside, I'm now going to start talking about spoilers for the film. So if you have not seen Spider-Man No Way Home yet, I recommend you turn off the video now. This is your last warning before I talk about full-blown spoilers for the film, because it will make my life a lot easier to explain things I did and didn't like when I talk about them. Right, so, spoiler stuff. The first thing I want to talk about is Aunt May. I've really liked Marissa Tomei in all three of the Tom Holland Spider-Man films. I think out of all the previous versions of Aunt May we've had, she's been given more to do than the previous versions. And I really like what she has brought to each of these Spider-Man films. Um, and I'm going to be honest, I was not expecting them to kill her off. Uh, that really took me by surprise. Now, I know the traditional thing with Spider Man films is they kill off Uncle Ben, but the MCU Spider Man films have not had a version of Uncle Ben. It's been mentioned once or twice, but there has been no physical version of him that we've seen. But the way they handled Aunt May's death in this film was both incredibly shocking and incredibly powerful. Right, next we have the villains, and I know the majority of them were shown in the trailers, but I wanted to keep my thoughts on them for this section because there's something specific I wanted to address here that I felt wasn't appropriate for the non spoiler bit. All of the 5 villains I think there are in this film are all brought in, as you know, from previous Spider-Man films that were pre MCU. Now, one of my worries was that they were just going to pop up, do a thing, and then bugger off. That's not the case. They all have their own respecting purpose for being there. They're all given their own moment to shine. They all work off of each other very well. Even the Andrew Garfield villains work very well with the Sam Raimi villains. And the one thing I really liked about the approach of the villains in this film, and it kind of goes for the film as a whole as well, is that it respects what each of the villains stood for and also doesn't, to an extent, bastardize their last appearance in film form. Like, the best example is Sandman. Though he isn't given as much to do as, say, Green Goblin or Electro, the way they handled his character in this film doesn't screw over how his character was left at the end of Spider-Man 3. When you first see Sandman in this film, he is still on Peter's side, as we know from the end of Spider-Man 3, which I thought was brilliant. But then, when he realizes that this isn't his universe, and that this is a different Peter Parker that he is with, the tables turn, and then we get this side to Flint Marko that isn't quite sure. And I really like that about this film. But it doesn't just go for Sandman, it goes for all of the villains in this film, like Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus. I really enjoyed seeing him again, as well as Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn. In my opinion, they are 2 of the best villains that have ever graced a Spider-Man film. And to see them both here again and actually play off of each other this time, because obviously they were in 2 separate films beforehand, they both really work on their own, but together as well. And again, their previous incarnations do not feel bastardized whatsoever. For example, there is a point where the inhibitor chip on the back of Doc Ock's neck, which was fried in Spider-Man 2, is fixed here. And he goes back to the Doc Ock that was a lot nicer and a lot more friendlier before the tentacles took over his brain. And once they have fixed that, they don't go back and immediately make him a villain again. They keep him as a normal, respecting, good person from that point onwards. I also thought the action set pieces were a massive step up as well from the previous MCU Spider-Man films. I think John Watts' direction overall is still nothing particularly special, but I do think he has slightly improved with each Spider-Man film. And with this one, I think he does a pretty good job. There are 3 major action set pieces overall. There's the bridge scene, which you've seen in the trailers, which I thought was a very good introduction for some of the villains. Then you have this brilliant apartment fight that just keeps escalating and escalating. And I kind of loved everything about that. That's probably my favorite fight in the entire film. It just keeps going and going and going and getting more intense and kind of more ridiculous as it goes on. And I just loved that about that scene. And then you have the big third act finale battle, which, though it does feel a bit cluttered at points and does feel like too much CGI happening at once, it still works. For the sake of the film and everything it's set up, it still really works. Right, now let's address the elephant, or should I say elephants, in the room. Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire are in this film. Um, it's something that was suspected for years. Well, it felt like that anyway. Um, and a part of me was like, yeah, they're probably going to be in the film, but until I see it with my own eyes, I'm not really going to believe it. And now that I have actually seen it, and with my own eyeballs, uh, it was a lot to take in. The first initial scene where they both appear in the same room was, I don't even know what words to say for it. I just had a massive smile on my face. But the interactions in the scenes after that, not just with them two, but with Tom Holland's Spider-Man as well, were also that those were some of the other reasons why I cried in this film, because it was just so emotionally overwhelming, not in a sad sense, but in a holy shit, this is my entire childhood on one screen at one time. It was kind of overwhelming at points, especially this really some of the smaller moments are what got me actually. Like there's this general just normal conversation that the three Peters have with each other about, you know, some of the craziest villains they've ever thought, and that was really lovely. There's a small moment where they're trying to fight all these bad guys at once. It's not going well. They reconvene. They figure out a strategy, and then Andrew Garfield's Peter just goes, "I love you guys." And again, that just brought a tear to my eye, because it's like it's just so perfect. And again, another moment that I think will, I mean, it will get a lot of people emotionally, but this hit me a lot harder than I was expecting it to. Um, and that is the moment where the scaffolding around the Statue of Liberty is starting to collapse. MJ falls. Tom Holland's Peter tries to catch her, but gets knocked out of the way by Goblin's glider. Andrew Garfield's Peter then tries to catch her in a scene very, very reminiscent of the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2, and successfully catches her. And there is this small exchange between him and MJ, and he goes to MJ, "Are you okay?" And she goes, "Yeah, are you okay?" And the look on his face, you can just see that he's holding back just a ton of tears, and it just got me. See, the thing about this film, and I've come to appreciate this more about the film since I've been thinking about it, is that it doesn't, and I said this a little bit earlier, is that it doesn't screw over everything that's been set up in the previous Spider-Man films. If anything, the film as a whole feels like a loving tribute and just a all-around really well done love letter to everything Spider-Man, past, present, and future. Everything in this film, especially once you hit the middle of the film onwards, just feels like it is the perfect tribute to everything Spider-Man related. And I love that about this film. It's even made me, in the hours since seeing it, have a newfound appreciation and respect for Spider-Man films that I initially wasn't that keen on. I'm talking about the Andrew Garfield films. Now, don't get me wrong, Andrew Garfield was without a doubt my favourite aspect of those two films, but the films as a whole, I think we can all agree, are a bit messy, specifically Amazing Spider-Man 2. But after seeing this film and the way that it lovingly respects and pays tribute to both the Raimi films and the Garfield films, just makes you appreciate everything that's come before a whole lot more. There is one last thing I want to mention before wrapping this video up, and that is the ending. The entire final act of this film is grand, it's big, it's very cathartic in parts, it's very emotional in parts. But the bit that got me the hardest was probably the very end of the film, where Tom Holland's Peter Parker agrees with Doctor Strange for him to cast a spell to make literally everyone forget who Peter Parker is. And at first I was like, oh, okay. But then after seeing his goodbyes to MJ and Ned, I was like, oh shit, right, okay, I'm starting to realize how impactful this is going to be. And the fact that they actually go ahead with it is probably the ballsiest move Marvel have made since the finger snap at the end of Infinity War. And I really like how they did it. It hit me again on an emotional level, especially the last interaction that he has with MJ. I thought was perfect. It's just really well done. It is just really well done, and the way that the end of the film sets up where Tom Holland's Spider-Man will go in the future, I'm really looking forward to, because like I said, this is the first MCU Spider-Man film that feels legitimately like a Spider-Man film and not like an MCU product. And the fact that he has now matured, the character has matured and is now in a different place in this by the end of the film, and he is now completely on his own in literally every sense of the word, means that from this point onwards, I feel like they can do anything with the character. Like, they can treat future Spider-Man films like actual Spider-Man films and don't have to forcefully try and link it to every MCU film that's existed. They can try and capture what made the Amazing Spider-Man or the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films work. They can try and be just straight up Spider-Man films. So guys, those are my thoughts on No Way Home. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on the film in the comments below. I would love to talk to you guys about this film in any shape or form down below. I've probably missed some things out, but I don't care. I just wanted to get my initial thoughts on video, just get them out there because it's hard trying to form coherent sentences at the moment because this film has mangled my brain a little bit. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.